Friday nights always had a rhythm I loved, the kind that hummed quietly in the background, like soft jazz spilling from another room. I wanted to feel that again, the warmth of candlelight, the easy laughter that used to fill our dinners. Ethan had been working late for weeks, and part of me refused to believe what my instincts whispered. So I decided to do something romantic, something spontaneous. I'd surprise him with dinner at La Terrasse, his favorite restaurant for anniversaries, back when anniversaries still meant something. When I called, the hostess sounded cheerful and kind, her tone full of that effortless hospitality. "Of course, Mrs. Rivers. The gentleman was just here yesterday. Same table, I assume?" I remember gripping the phone a little tighter, the words echoing in my head. "Yesterday?" My throat went dry. I asked gently, "Yesterday? With me?" The pause that followed felt endless, like holding my breath underwater. "Oh, pardon me," she stammered. "I assumed. He was with his girlfriend, I believe. They loved the Cabernet." In that instant, the world tilted, silent, sharp, merciless. My stomach twisted, and my mind replayed his voice from the night before. "I'll be home late. Big meeting." I hung up, my hand trembling, the irony cutting deep. The Cabernet he loved. I bought that bottle for our anniversary. And now, staring at the phone, I whispered to myself, he came here with her. And tomorrow he'll come back with me. I spent that night pacing the house like a ghost, my thoughts looping in circles that had no exit. Every corner of our home seemed to whisper his lies back to me, his jacket draped over the chair, his cologne still clinging to the hallway. I kept asking myself why I wasn't screaming, why I wasn't throwing his things out into the street. But anger never came first. It was disbelief. Cold, quiet, and suffocating. The kind that sits on your chest and dares you to breathe. I poured myself a glass of wine, our wine, the Cabernet that now tasted like betrayal. The first sip burned, but I didn't stop. I wanted to feel something other than numb. I thought about how he used to hold my hand at dinner, tracing little circles with his thumb, the kind of small gestures that once felt eternal. Somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing when those gestures disappeared. By midnight, I made up my mind. I wouldn't confront him with tears or questions. I'd let the truth reveal itself in the same setting he chose for his deceit. If La Terrasse was where he thought love could be replaced, then that's where I'd let him taste the silence of his own betrayal. Tomorrow night, we'd dine under the same lights, at the same table. Only this time, I'd be the one watching. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Ethan's side of the bed was already cold, the indentation of his body fading like the memory of his promises. I sat there for a while, running my fingers over the sheets, wondering how many lies could fit between two people before the silence finally breaks them. I didn't cry. Not yet. My tears would have only fed the illusion that he still had power over me. Instead, I showered slowly, letting the water wash away the ache sitting just beneath my skin. I studied my reflection. Same face, same eyes, but something in them had shifted. There was steel where softness used to be. I called La Terrasse again, my voice steady this time, as I made a reservation for 2. The same table, the same time, the same wine. When I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace, it was purpose. I chose my dress with care, the one he'd always said made me look like a secret. That night, I would let him see what happens when secrets meet the light. The truth was waiting at that table, and I was ready to serve it. By evening, I had transformed myself into something he wouldn't see coming. Calm, elegant, untouchable. When I stepped out of the bedroom, Ethan looked up from his phone, surprised. "Dinner? Tonight?" he asked, flashing that same practiced smile that once made me melt. "At La Terrasse," I said softly, watching the flicker in his eyes before he masked it with delight. "Wow, fancy place," he said, grinning. "Didn't know we had that in town." My lips curved, but my heart didn't follow. "You've never been there before?" I asked. "Nope. First time," he said easily. The drive was quiet. the kind of silence filled with things unspoken. Streetlights blurred past the windshield, glowing like reminders of everything I was about to expose. I watched him hum along to the radio, tapping the steering wheel like a man without a care in the world. My fingers rested in my lap, folded neatly, the picture of serenity. Inside, though, I could feel every beat of my pulse, measured, deliberate, waiting. When we arrived, the warm light of La Terrasse spilled across the sidewalk, just like I remembered from our anniversaries. The scent of roasted garlic and wine drifted through the air, wrapping around me like irony itself. Ethan took my hand as we walked in, pretending we were still that perfect couple. But as soon as the waiter looked up, the same one from the phone call, I knew the evening was about to shift. The waiter smiled the way only someone confident in recognition can. "Welcome back, sir. Would you like the same wine you had yesterday?" The air in my lungs froze. I heard the sound of the restaurant fade into a dull hum, the clinking glasses, the low jazz, the laughter from other tables, all drowned beneath the weight of that one sentence. Ethan's hand jerked slightly in his lap. His smile faltered, just enough for me to see the crack. I turned to him slowly, my face still soft, my voice steady. "Yesterday?" I said sweetly. "I thought this was your first time here, darling." He laughed, the kind of nervous laugh people use when they're scrambling for oxygen. "He must be mistaken," he said quickly. "You know how these places are." But the waiter, poor soul, looked mortified. "I'm sorry, sir, but I remember you clearly. You said the lady loved the red dress." For a moment, even the candles seemed to stop flickering. My hand tightened around my napkin, but my expression didn't move. I gave a gentle smile, the kind that hides 1,000 unsaid truths. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I remember now. You've always had expensive taste." He looked at me, searching for mercy in my eyes, but I'd already traded mercy for clarity. The rest of the evening unfolded like a play where both actors knew the ending, but refused to say their lines. The waiter moved nervously around our table, placing dishes neither of us touched. Ethan tried to recover, asking about work, about the neighbors, about anything that could fill the silence between us. But every sound, the clink of cutlery, the pop of a cork, only reminded me that truth had already been poured, and it couldn't be bottled again. I watched him lift his glass, pretending not to see his hands trembling. "To us," he murmured, forcing a smile. I met his toast with steady eyes. "To honesty," I replied. The words cut sharper than crystal. He swallowed, nodded, and looked away, his charm collapsing under the weight of his own performance. I could almost taste his guilt, metallic, bitter, unrefined. When the check arrived, he fumbled for his wallet, desperate to end the night before it drowned him. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I smiled, leaned closer, and said softly, "You know, Ethan, it's strange how the truth always finds a way to sit at the table, even when it wasn't invited." His eyes flickered toward me, but I simply stood, leaving the tension behind like perfume in the air. The night wasn't over, it was only beginning. We drove home in silence, the kind that feels alive, like it's breathing between you, heavy and invisible. Streetlights flashed across his face, carving him into pieces. Guilt, fear, arrogance, denial. I watched his jaw tighten, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel in a rhythm that betrayed his nerves. The same man who once convinced me that lies were misunderstandings now couldn't find the words to cover his own tracks. Halfway home, he exhaled sharply. "Nat," he was confused, he said. "You know I've been slammed at work." His tone tried to sound casual, but it wobbled at the edges. I turned to him, my voice quiet. "Yes," I said. "At La Terrasse Incorporated, apparently." He looked at me, eyes flashing. "Oh, come on! It was just dinner! It didn't mean anything." I stared ahead, the road blurring into streaks of gold and shadow. "I didn't ask if it meant anything," I said softly. "I asked if you enjoyed the wine." That shut him up. For a second, I almost pitied him. Almost. but pity is the privilege of the innocent, and he'd lost that right the moment he made me reserve the scene of his betrayal. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, the sound cutting through the air like a warning. "Stop twisting everything. Why can't you just let it go?" he shouted. His voice echoed inside the car, bouncing off the glass, but I didn't flinch. I'd lived through worse storms, quieter ones, colder ones. "Let it go," I said slowly. "You built this lie, Ethan. Brick by brick. And now you're angry because I finally noticed the walls?" His breathing was heavy, erratic. I could see the panic beneath his frustration, that desperate scramble men get when the mask starts to slip. "You're overreacting," he muttered, gripping the wheel. "It was dinner, Nat. Just dinner." I turned toward him, meeting his eyes in the glow of the dashboard. "Then why lie about it? Why pretend you were working while she was wearing red and drinking my wine?" He didn't answer. The silence returned, only this time it wasn't heavy. It was hollow, empty of excuses, stripped of charm. He looked smaller somehow, like the version of him I'd built in my mind had finally cracked apart, leaving just the man who'd broken everything sacred between us. When we pulled into the driveway, neither of us moved. The engine hummed, low and restless, like it wanted to escape the tension we couldn't. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, trying to summon some version of himself I'd still believe in. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is," he said finally, his voice brittle. I turned toward him, calm, almost gentle. "No, Ethan. You made it small. You made our marriage small enough to fit between a wine glass and a lie." He looked at me then, not with guilt, but with fear. The kind of fear that comes when someone realizes they've been seen completely. "What do you want me to say?" he whispered. "The truth," I said simply, "but you wouldn't recognize it now if it sat beside you at dinner." His eyes darted away, finding comfort in the darkness beyond the windshield. I opened the car door and stepped out, the cool night air wrapping around me like armor. "You didn't just cheat, Ethan," I said quietly, leaning down to meet his gaze through the open door. "You made me call to reserve the scene of your betrayal." His face crumpled, words caught somewhere between regret and denial. I closed the door, leaving him there in the silence he'd earned. The night had taken everything from me, except my resolve. The morning after our silent car ride, I woke up to sunlight cutting through the blinds, thin, sharp, and merciless, like the truth itself. Ethan had already left for work, or at least that's what he'd tell himself. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched coffee pot, realizing that love, when it dies, doesn't shatter loudly. It fades like steam, quietly, invisibly, but completely. Somewhere between the sound of the clock ticking and the hum of the refrigerator, a new version of me started to breathe. I wasn't going to scream or cry or beg him to explain the things he'd already proven. I was done being the woman who waited for closure that never came. Instead, I decided to give him something he couldn't lie his way out of. A truth he'd have to face in public, under the same dim lights where he thought he was untouchable. That's when the idea formed, simple and elegant, like revenge disguised as dinner. I picked up the phone and called La Terrasse again. My voice was calm, steady, almost warm. "Yes," I said. "This is Mrs. Rivers. I'll need the same table as before, for 4 this time." The hostess paused, probably smiling politely on the other end. "4 guests, of course. Who shall I expect?" I smiled to myself, watching the sunlight dance across the rim of my empty cup. "My husband, myself," I said softly. "His girlfriend, and her husband." After hanging up, I sat back and listened to the faint hum of the dial tone fading. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, that would take time, but a deep, grounded stillness. Revenge wasn't about anger anymore. It was about symmetry. If he wanted to live in a lie so desperately, I'd simply invite the truth to dinner and let it pull up a chair beside him. No yelling, no chaos, just consequences served at room temperature. I spent the afternoon at my desk, typing with deliberate calm, drafting an anonymous message that would change everything. I didn't rush it. Every word needed to land softly but cut deeply. When I finished, I attached a photo of Ethan, one of those charming business shots he used for work, and added a single line. "He's taking me to the place you loved. Join us." I read it twice, then hit send. The click sounded like closure. Leaning back, I watched the message disappear into the digital void, and I wondered what she'd feel when she read it. Shock, panic, maybe even satisfaction. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they'd both walk into that restaurant thinking they were in control, only to realize they'd just stepped into my design. For the first time in a long time, I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I was finally awake. That evening, I stood by the window, watching the sun melt into gold over the rooftops. The city looked peaceful, unaware that somewhere within it, I was rearranging the pieces of my own story. I thought about the woman he'd betrayed me with, the one who probably believed every lie he'd ever told me. I didn't hate her. In a way, she was just another version of me, still blind, still waiting to learn the language of deceit. I almost pitied her for what tomorrow would bring. Almost. I prepared everything with care, the way I used to plan our anniversaries. Reservations, timing, even what I'd wear. There was something poetic about it, really. The same restaurant, the same table, but a completely different woman sitting there. Not the one who trusted too easily, but the one who finally stopped forgiving quietly. I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted one that whispered, the kind that lingered long after the wine was gone. Before going to bed, I looked at Ethan asleep beside me, his chest rising and falling like nothing had changed. His face was calm, unbothered, untouched by the storm quietly gathering around him. I whispered, almost to myself, "Tomorrow you'll finally taste what you've been serving." Then I turned off the light and lay awake, listening to the faint rhythm of justice approaching with every passing hour. The next evening, La Terrasse glowed like a secret waiting to be told. Candlelight flickered against polished glass, soft music floated through the air, and I could almost taste the anticipation. Ethan walked beside me, unaware of the storm about to unfold. He held my hand, the same hand he once promised to protect, and smiled as if tonight were just another date night. "You look stunning," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "You make it easy to forget the world." I smiled back, matching his lie with my calm. "Good," I said softly. "You'll want to forget this one." As we stepped inside, the familiar scent of roasted rosemary and wine wrapped around us. My heart didn't race this time. It steadied. I'd already lived through the pain. What remained now was the performance. The hostess guided us to our table, the same one, tucked in the corner under soft golden light. Ethan thanked her, oblivious, pulling out my chair like a gentleman rehearsing decency. I watched his reflection in the glass, confident, careless, entirely unprepared. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. She entered quietly, dressed in crimson, her husband's hand on her arm. Her eyes found Ethan before she even spotted me, and I could see it, the instant her expression shifted from recognition to realization. That was my cue. I turned to Ethan, my voice low, almost kind. "You didn't tell me we'd have company." Ethan turned pale. His eyes darted from me to the woman in red, then to the man beside her, the one she'd probably sworn was just a friend. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. "Natalie, what is this?" he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his own performance. I folded my napkin neatly, the way I always did when I was done pretending. "A reunion," I said simply. "You've always liked surprises." The mistress, younger, nervous, glared at him, her lipstick trembling as she whispered, "You told me you were single." Her husband's jaw clenched beside her, his hands gripping the tablecloth like restraint was the only thing keeping him seated. Ethan looked between us, searching for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere left. "I can explain," he started, but I lifted my glass, cutting through his sentence like the blade of a smile. "He tells everyone that, dear," I said, my voice warm enough to sting. "It's his favorite wine pairing, lies and red." The waiter, poor thing, froze mid-step, pretending not to hear. The jazz in the background swelled softly, almost mercifully. I raised my glass higher, meeting the mistress's husband's eyes. "To new beginnings," I said gently, "and honest endings." Our glasses touched, a sound so small, yet it shattered everything Ethan had ever tried to protect. Ethan stood there, speechless, his mask finally gone. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to gather the fragments of his charm, but there was nothing left to say. The mistress couldn't look at him. Her husband pushed his chair back and walked away first, silent but certain. She followed seconds later, her heels clicking in rhythm with her regret. And Ethan. He stayed frozen, watching everything collapse in slow motion. I'd never seen him so small. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress, calm as the candlelight. "You should eat," I said softly, the faintest trace of pity threading through the words. "It's a shame to let good wine go to waste." He reached for me, his voice breaking. "Natalie, please." But I was already walking away, the echo of my heels sharper than any words he could ever find. Every step felt like freedom, deliberate, final, earned. As I reached the door, I turned back one last time. He was still standing there, the liar at his own table, surrounded by the wreckage of his choices. For years I had built my life around his comfort. Now he could sit with his own discomfort for a while. I smiled, not in victory, but in peace, and stepped out into the night air, letting it carry the last traces of him away. Months later, I found myself sitting at a sunlit cafe, the kind with chipped mugs and laughter spilling from every corner. My friends were talking about summer plans, new recipes, new beginnings. I laughed easily, genuinely, something I hadn't done in years. The air smelled like roasted coffee and freshly baked croissants, and for the first time, I realized how light freedom can feel when it's no longer tangled with someone else's lies. My divorce papers were signed, my name finally standing alone, and I liked the sound of it. Across the street, a delivery truck passed by with the name La Terrasse painted on its side, and I caught myself smiling. Not bitterly, but with a quiet sort of amusement. Life has a strange way of bringing symbols back, just to see if you've really healed. I took another sip of my cappuccino and thought about how I'd once mistaken chaos for passion, silence for peace. Now I could tell the difference. My business, La Vérité, The Truth, had just launched. An events company that specialized in celebrations that meant something real. There was something poetic about that too, building beauty from the wreckage. Sometimes I think he taught me more than he ever meant to. He taught me what betrayal tastes like, and in doing so, he made me crave honesty and the sweetness that comes after. Sometimes people ask if I miss him. I don't answer right away, not because I'm unsure, but because I like to weigh my words before setting them free. The truth is, I miss the idea of who I thought he was, not the man himself. The version I loved existed only in memories and half-lit dinners. When I finally let that illusion go, I realized how much space it had taken up inside me. Space I now fill with laughter, travel plans, and mornings that don't start with lies. My friends still tease me about naming my business after The Truth. But to me, it's more than a brand. It's a promise to myself. Every event I plan, every celebration I design, I make sure it's honest, real, no pretending, no perfect facades. People deserve moments that reflect who they are, not who they're trying to be. And maybe that's the quiet revenge after all, to live beautifully, without the people who once made you doubt your worth. That night at La Terrasse feels like another lifetime now. I sometimes pass by its glowing windows, couples laughing under the same chandeliers where I lost everything. But now, I don't look away. I walk past with my head high, my heart steady, and a small, knowing smile. Because the wine may still taste the same, but I've learned to choose better bottles and better company. Every so often, when the evening light hits just right, I pour myself a glass of wine, never Cabernet, and raise it to the woman I used to be. She deserved the truth sooner, but she also deserved the chance to rebuild herself without apology. I no longer chase closure, because I've learned it doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from the moment you stop waiting for their remorse. That's when freedom finally settles in, softly, like the last note of a song you didn't know you loved. I think of Ethan sometimes, not with anger, but with distance. People like him live in cycles, charming, lying, repeating. But I stepped off that carousel the moment I chose peace over performance. Maybe he still sits at La Terrasse, ordering the same wine, telling someone else the same stories. And maybe she believes him, the way I once did, but that's not my burden anymore. Life tastes different now. Lighter, fuller, richer. I've learned that healing doesn't announce itself. It just shows up one morning when the coffee tastes better and the silence feels kind. He taught me how betrayal burns, yes, but freedom lingers, and it's far sweeter.